Hey, Howell here. What I want to do today is make a brief video about the tree of knowledge of good and evil, or the tree of death as it's known in the Zohar. And I want to begin with the official story that we find in the Judeo-Christian tradition to begin with, where Yahweh is seen as this good creator, demiurge God. And the duality is the serpent, who is the evil devil, Satan, Samael. And there are many trees in this garden of Eden, this paradise, the tree of life. And then in the center, there's this tree of knowledge of good and evil. And the Lord commands Eve, although she's not yet named, she's not named until after the curse. And I'm reading this. He says, of all the trees you're free to eat, but as for the tree of knowledge of good and evil, you must not eat from it. For as soon as you do, you will surely die. Now, the thing is that I've looked at many translations of this, English translations of the Bible, and they vary differently. And one says, this day you will surely die. But as we all know, that when Eve and Adam and Eve eat from this tree, they don't die in the conventional sense, but they do change. And then it later says the two of them, that's the man and the woman, were naked and felt no shame. Well, who is naked and feels no shame? It's an animal. What is naked and feels no shame? It's an animal or a child that's not yet, it's not yet sexually aware. It's not yet come of age. But the serpent that does say, Yahweh disappears and the serpent appears. And the serpent says, did God really say to you, if you eat from this tree, you will surely die? And Eve says, yes. He said, we're not even allowed to touch it, or we will die. And the serpent says, and I'm reading this, you will not die. As soon as you eat from it, your eyes will be open and you will be like divine beings. So the next bit is really important. The woman saw that the fruit was good for eating, and she ate and gave some to her husband. So she sees it's good, she tastes it, and then she goes as far as to recommend it to her husband. She doesn't spit it out. You know, it's apparently ripe fruit and good for eating, which I'll come back to. The serpent then disappears, and then Yahweh reappears, which is strange because isn't he meant to be the invisible, omnipresent, omnipotent God, the all-seeing eye, the all-knowing? And he reappears and he wants to know things like, how did you know you were naked? So Eve has told him that they were aware that they were naked. Well, the serpent tricked us into eating from the tree. And then Yahweh starts panicking. He sort of thinks, well, they will become like us, knowing good from evil. They will be like divine beings. And so that there's this knocking them back down with this curse. And so Eve gets cursed, as we know, Adam gets cursed, and the serpent too gets the curse. So this knocking down of entities that try to, or human beings that try to rise above the gods, is quite common. There's two other examples in the Tanakh and in other traditions. So you've got Isaiah 14:12, how art thou fallen from heaven? In the King James Bible, it says, oh, Lucifer. In the Hebrew, it's Halel, meaning the shining one. So you've got a reference to a physical king, right? But this physical king is able to rise or try to rise above God. And he gets knocked back down, fallen from heaven to deceive the nations. Ezekiel 28, you've got royal figures doing the same. And there's a reference, you were a cherub in Eden. So on one hand, it's a royal physical figure, and on the other hand, it's a cherub that was in Eden, and it gets knocked back down. It's the same in Greek culture with Prometheus and Zeus. Prometheus wants to teach people how to use fire, meaning the beginning of civilization, the start of civilization. And Zeus knocks him back down. And in that culture, Prometheus is seen as good, and Zeus is seen as bad. Christopher Young Birkeness, the CJB books, has an interesting theory that it contradicts what I said earlier, that the fruit on the tree isn't ripe for eating. So the serpent is deceiving Adam and Eve to eat from the unripe fruit. I want to know more about that. I don't really, I want to know more about that, because earlier on we've seen how Eve sees that the fruit is good for eating, and she eats it and doesn't spit it out, and then she goes as far as to recommend it to her husband. In the Gnostic view, in the Nag Hammadi text, the serpent is seen as a murderer and an adulterer. So in Gnosticism, generally speaking, Yahweh is seen as this evil, parasitical God, and the serpent is seen as good. Although the good serpent turns evil, you've got the good serpent and the crooked serpent. But it's seen as an adulterer and a murderer. So when the serpent gets Eve to eat from the fruit, he is then complicit in her murder. And then when he beguiles her later, he's seen as an adulterer. As we'll see later, there are references to the opposite of this in the Nag Hammadi text. In the Gospel of Philip, when Adam was Eve, there was no death. When she was separated from Adam, death came. When she enters him or re-enters him, death will cease to be. So what we've got there is a reference to death before eating from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. So what we have is death appears as soon as Eve comes from the side of Adam. So in the beginning they're androgynous. Eve is then taken from the side. Death appears, and death will cease to be when they become one androgynous being again. In the secret book of John, it's got the serpent instructed them to eat the wickedness of sexual desire. So again, we've got this reference to how did you know you were naked? How did you know that you were naked? The serpent tricked us to eat of the tree of death. And that representing a child coming of age, the wickedness of sexual desire. In the book, The Nature of the Rulers, also in the Nag Hammadi text. The Nag Hammadi text, by the way, is a Gnostic library that was found in the deserts in Egypt just after the war. It dates back to nearly 2,000 years ago. And Nature of the Rulers, I'm quote reading this, the authorities lusted after her, Eve. That's rather like the fallen angel story of the Anunnaki. They lusted after the daughters of men, or the watchers in the book of Enoch. They tried to defile Eve, but she left a shadow of herself. She turned into a tree. So the idea is that in this particular book, the serpent doesn't get to beguile Eve because she tricks them by turning into a shadow. She leaves a shadow of herself. And if they discover that it's only a shadow and they go looking for her, they won't find her because she's shapeshifted into a tree. Also in that same book, there's this thing where there's a real God beyond the Archon God, the main Yaldabaoth, the main Archon God, Yahweh. And he wants Adam and Eve to eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And so then the Archons think, well, we're going to stop them from eating from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And then the Archons see that the serpent sees that and encourages them to eat from the tree of knowledge of good and evil. So in the end, God has used the Archons and has used the serpent to get Adam and Eve to eat from the tree of death. To end on, I want to look at Mark Passier's view, where he likens the fruit of the tree of, that's Mark Passio from What on Earth Is Happening.com. He likens the fruit on the tree of knowledge of good and evil to objective morality, objective law, objective reality. And as soon as you eat from it or you touch from it, that's the beginning of moral relativism. You know, that truth or morality is inherent in creation. And then you pick from that tree, and that's the beginning of you getting to decide what's right and wrong, moral relativism, which in my opinion is one of the most dangerous things, if not the most dangerous thing facing humanity, is moral relativism. And that concludes my talk. Thank you so much for joining me.